So there's been this debate going around the fitness industry about functional training and the merits of it and whether it's a good thing to pursue, whether it even exists really. So I thought I'd just give my own 2 cents on the issue. Now, I don't know if functional training is really the best word for it. I think Bioneer also contemplated whether this was the best word for it as well. I would say it's more so like human maximization training, I guess. Human potential training. I don't know. Maximization training is probably more accurate to what it is. Or I would probably call it something like natural training as it adheres to sort of natural law. Natural law is a moral philosophy coined by people like Aristotle, Aquinas, and even Paul in the Bible. It basically means that we know right from wrong, and we can determine right from wrong based off the natural law that's written in our heart. I very much oversimplified it, but I think that gets the point across. This may sound really pretentious, but hear me out. Embedded within natural law is natural order, for a lack of a better word. Natural order in this context basically just means that we should acknowledge the natural design of things in everything we do, which in this context means that we should exercise in a way which our body was meant to move. Your body's made for food to process and digest it. Likewise, your muscles are made for a specific thing. This includes but is not limited to things like squatting, climbing, picking things off the ground, which is akin to deadlifting, running, jumping, and much more. So then under this philosophy, it makes sense that we would optimize these functions. And I think that's why people are really interested in the idea of functional training, is that it optimizes every facet of our bodily functions. Because our bodies are capable of doing something, because it's in our nature to do something, it then logically follows that that thing is good to maximize. This makes it such that the highest bodily good is to maximize our bodily functions, hence functional training. Functional training in this sense would mean that you don't just do calisthenics instead of weightlifting or high reps instead of low reps. It's holistically looking at all of your bodily functions and trying to maximize and optimize and balance all that it's capable of. You're using your body in the way it's supposed to be used. That way you can either live as long as possible, or that you can just feel as though you're using your body as proper as possible, which I think is a good thing to strive for. So I just call it natural training. I guess not call it natural law training. It sounds like too scholarly or whatever. Natural training or maximization training or human potential training is probably more what I think about it. To me, what it means to be fit, what it means to be a good athlete, what it means to be a good athlete is to maximize every faculty of human fitness, to maximize every aspect of your human potential. This is what I would say is fitness in its truest form. And if there's anything that could be seen as functional training, it would be this, right? What is fitness when you actually think about it? Fitness is the ability for an organism to survive. So for an organism to survive, you need to acknowledge all of its faculties, and you need to maximize all of its faculties to give it the best to get the best chance of surviving. That means you have to be strong, you have to be fast, you have to be endurance, you got to have a good heart. And this necessarily means that you're not going to be able to specialize in too many things. Of course, you're going to have some things that you're better at than others. Like I'm personally very good at explosive training and hypertrophy training, muscle strength and relative strength and all that. I'm better suited there, which is why I tend to kind of focus on it more. But ideally with this, you wouldn't ignore any faculties, I should say. You wouldn't sacrifice your strength at the expense of your endurance. You wouldn't sacrifice your speed at the expense of your balance or your coordination. Although they tend to go together, but kind of just ignore that. In Bioneer's book, I believe it was like functional strength or something like that. I'll have the link to it in the description. I'll have the image of it right now on the screen. He brings up a study about how swimmers actually have a lower vertical jump than the average person because they've been specialized so much for swimming that this is the implication anyway. So they specialize so much in swimming that they've actually reduced their ability to perform another bodily function like jumping. This means that, again, you're kind of a jack of all trades and master of none, which, kind of takes a special person to really go through with, because it's kind of disheartening when when you're not very good at something, but you keep doing it when you could be doing something that you're good at. I'm not very flexible at all. And so it's much more exciting for me to do, strength training than it is for me to stretch. Although I do stretch a lot, and I stretch more than like 95% of athletes, by the way, but I'm still very, very terrible. I have piss poor flexibility, but I stretch and I do mobility stuff more than anyone else. I can almost guarantee you that, not anyone else, but like more than like 95% of athletes I see. I can almost guarantee you that. But still, I'm not very good at it. And, it's probably better that I do focus on those things instead of focusing on everything I'm good at, because there's no need for me to actually be a pro, maximize my strength a lot if I'm not a pro athlete. I could probably learn to deadlift 500 pounds, but I'm probably still not going to win any competitions or anything. So is it really worth it if I sacrifice all these other physical faculties to get something that just like an extra like 50 pounds in the deadlift, when I'm not even going to be making any money off it or anything? Like, is it really worth it? I wouldn't say so. Some people would. That's all up to you, I guess. But when it comes to functional training, when it comes to fitness broadly speaking, it kind of goes against that. And that's why people, I think, want to do functional training, right? And, I probably should go into, more detail as to why people want to do functional training. Because I think people like functional training because it's more natural. That's why I like to call it natural training. It's more in accordance to how you were designed, which kind of just feels better. People just kind of feel good doing things that they know that their bodies were designed to do. This is kind of speculative, but it also helps with longevity, right? Because if you just focus on strength and powerlifting, by the time you're 50, your joints might just break or whatever. But if you have very solid mobility, very solid flexibility, very solid joint health from doing all these corrective exercises, all these kind of boring exercises, then even if it might compromise your strength in like the short term, in the long term, you will be a more healthy person. Your body will be able to move better by the time you're older. I've seen stories of like 90-year-old people who get up in the morning and they do farm work still, and they're 90 years old. Most people are dead at like 80 years old. That's very, very impressive. And if that appeals to you, then functional training should appeal to you as well, because that's why that will be the most likely sort of thing that will be able to keep you sustainable and keep you healthy. Similarly, I don't want any back problems by the time I'm 65. I want to still be able to do a deep squat. That way I can, sit down on the same level as my kids when I'm older. You may argue that we can learn how to do this stuff when we're older, but our ability to make any substantial physical gains by the time we're, above 50, 60 is significantly diminished. So it's better to have that sort of base when you're younger and then build off of it when you're older, or like try and keep it when you're older, and that way it's much more sustainable. Psychologists and like physical therapists have identified 7 kinds of strengths. This includes, I'm just gonna look at my screen here, maximal strength, relative strength, explosive strength, strength endurance, agile strength, speed strength, and starting strength. Now, I'm not going to get into detail with all of these, but I think the first 4 or so are pretty self-explanatory. Maximal strength, that's how much weight you can lift, absolutely speaking. Then there's relative strength, which is how much you can lift in relation to your body. This is like really good for gymnasts and like, calisthenics people, because they can lift way more than Olympic athletes. They can lift way more than their body weight. They can do like 50 pull-ups or whatever, and they can like deadlift 500 pounds when they're like 180 pounds, so they have very good relative strength. But absolute strength is not powerlifters. I mean, some powerlifters, like, the like super heavyweight powerlifters, but it's mostly like the strongmen, like, the Eddie Halls of the world. And then explosive strength, this is like sort of, your ability to jump high like basketball players, your ability to start really quickly, to change directions, that sort of stuff. And then strength endurance is like, how long can you sustain that strength? Like, can you hold a handstand for a very long time? Can you do farmer's walks for a very long time? That sort of stuff. Something I'll go into a little bit more detail here is the 5 pillars of strength. And this is my own personal 5 pillars of strength. I know Bioneer made a video on it some time ago, but I can promise you this predates Bioneer's. It's just, I never actually publicized it. I was working on it for a video, I was working on it for a book, which I still haven't released yet, so just bear with me. So the 5 pillars of fitness, I think I said 5 pillars of strength before. This is the 5 pillars of fitness is what it's actually called. This is speed, strength, endurance, flexibility, and coordination. If you have these 5 things, then you're probably going to be a very proper athlete. So strength is pretty obvious. I didn't really make a difference between absolute strength and relative strength because, you know, if you're relatively strong, then you're also pretty absolutely strong. And then speed this is like your explosiveness. This is your ability, of course, to run fast. It's your ability to jump high. It's your ability to, you know, it's ability to be quick, to be agile. I think they had agile strength and explosive strength as different categories in the first one. I don't think there's quite a meaningful difference between them. You know, if you're quick and you're explosive, there's a very high chance that you're agile as well and that you can switch directions really quickly. This is something that you do a lot in basketball. If you're like a guard, you run to one side and then you quickly switch directions and go to the other side. And then, you know, when you're dribbling, I'm going to use basketball a lot in this video because basketball is a sport I played for like 10 years or whatever before I started lifting weights. Basketball is a very good way to sort of maximize this faculty of fitness, in my opinion. Then there's endurance. This is also strength endurance and also like, you know, cardiovascular endurance. You know, how low is your heart rate? How fast can you run a mile? That sort of stuff. That is very important. Arguably, that's the most important type of fitness because that's your health. That's your heart. The number one cause of death is basically like heart problems, right? So if you can have a really good heart, that's very, very important. Of course, everything else is very important just for you moving in general, but in terms of your longevity, in terms of like your ability to live for a long time, it's probably cardiovascular endurance that's the most important. There's also strength endurance that's important as well that I think should be coupled in here. So like your ability to use your strength for a long time, your ability to, you know, like on a hike, like on like the military, they take you on with these hikes where you like carry like 50 pounds on your back the whole time. That's very important. That's a very important kind of strength as well, as, you know, obviously the military seems to think it's very important. Flexibility, and I can put mobility in this as well. This is your ability to get into a longer range of motion, and this will keep your joints and your entire, like the rest of your body just really healthy, right? Because when you're flexible, you're able to move better, and but think about the time when you get older, you're gonna be able to move better and longer. And so I think this is very important for people to do. Flexibility standards that I think should be met. Although I don't think that like this one needs to be like overemphasized. Like I don't think you need to like learn how to do the splits or anything. Although probably doesn't hurt. You probably don't need to learn how to do the splits, but this is also really important just for like your overall joint and like body health in general. It's also really important for martial arts, which I think is a really, really good way to stay fit in like all of these faculties. So I think it's important to have flexibility in there. And the last one, coordination. This one might feel a little bit weird to you all, but I think that it's not just enough to have the ability to move your body, to have the ability to exert force with your body, but it's also your ability to use that force in a meaningful way. When you're, you know, learning how to handstand walk, you're learning how to coordinate your hands properly. Although this is also balance technically. Although I was going to separate balance and coordination into 2 separate ones, but you know, I want to have 5. I want to have 5 pillars of fitness because that just sounds better. It's like a nice rounded number. Also, I think every meaningful definition of balance also fits with coordination, but not every meaningful definition of coordination fits with balance, if you know what I mean. Like you need to be coordinated to have balance. Like balance is your ability to stand upright in any which position. This can be like standing straight regularly, or it could be like, you know, handstands, or even if you get to this point, like a one-arm handstand, right? But coordination is your ability to use your joints in a meaningful, in a proper way, which I think incorporates balance, right? So I just put them in together. Anyway, that's a tangent. Coordination also has to do with your ability to like do juggling, like juggling balls. Also has to do with your ability to like cognitively map an area, to like understand the difference, like the distances between different areas. Like sort of like, you know, if I'm playing basketball, right? Like, you know, you understand like how much force you need to exert to shoot a 3-pointer or something like that, because that's very important, right? And, you know, if you know how to like dribble a basketball from side to side, you go between the legs, go behind the back, then you're very aware of like how much force you need to do to dribble the ball, where the ball is without looking, where like the ball is going to be without looking directly at the ball. That's very important. It's a very practical use and a very very good use of your strength. Another example, of course, is balancing a handstand. You have to understand where you are in like a sort of mental space. This would also have to do with like parkour, right? Like where you understand where your body is within the environment and you can navigate it properly. So all those faculties of coordination, all those faculties I think can be broadly summarized in coordination. Maybe there's a better word for this that I'm going to think about later on, but that's the best way I can think about it for now. It's sort of how you use your strength and like the mental faculties that you have to order that strength into something meaningful instead of just like blind strength that can be used to adapt to any situation. It's not just strength for strength's sake, but it's your ability to use that strength for something meaningful and something adaptable. That's what I would consider to be a very functional use of strength that people don't really talk about. So I think that coordination, broadly speaking, again, I might think of a better word for this, is very important. I plan on probably making an individual video on all of those 5 pillars, the 7 different types of strength that I talked about before this. They fit broadly into my 5 pillars of strength, so I might just make a mini series of like the 5 pillars of strength. That way I can, explain this in more detail. And this is sort of my take on the whole functional training debate that's going on right now. I hope you enjoyed my take. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll catch you all next time. Peace.